There's a sound a heart makes when it breaks. It's not a loud, dramatic shatter like glass on marble. No, it's a quieter thing. A deep, internal snap, like a single, frayed string on a cello that's been wound too tight. You feel it more than you hear it. A sudden, slack emptiness where there was once tension and music. For Elena, that sound happened on a Tuesday. It wasn't just one string that snapped. It was the entire symphony of her life. Every note, every harmony she had taken for granted, collapsing into a dissonant, screaming silence. And the two men who held the scissors were the two men she loved most in the world. Her father, Robert, the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, whose shoulders had carried her through childhood storms. And Mark, her fiancé, the man whose eyes she looked into and saw her future. This is a story about trust, the kind of absolute, foundational trust we place in our pillars. And what happens when those pillars are not made of stone, but of sand, and they crumble at the first secret, selfish wave. To understand the depth of the fall, you have to first see the height of the tower. 6 months before Tuesday, Elena's life was a photograph of perfect happiness. At 28, she had everything she'd ever wanted. A career she loved as a junior architect, designing structures that would, in theory, stand the test of time. A cozy, sun-drenched apartment filled with plants and the smell of fresh coffee. And she had Mark. Mark was golden. He had a smile that could disarm a room and a charm that felt like sunlight. He was a freelance photographer, all effortless, cool, and creative. They'd met 2 years prior at a gallery opening. He was photographing the event. She was admiring a bleak landscape. He'd sidled up next to her. "Mark, see the crack in the foreground? The artist told me that's where the light gets in." It was a line. Of course it was a line. But when he said it, his eyes were sincere. Elena felt it. He saw the world the way she wanted to. Their engagement, 6 months ago, had been on a windswept cliff at sunset. Of course, Mark knew how to frame a moment. Then there was her father, Robert, a bear of a man with gentle hands, a retired engineer who now spent his days in his workshop, building intricate dollhouses for his daughter, long since grown. He was a rock. After her mother's passing from cancer 5 years ago, he and Elena had clung to each other, a duo against the world. He'd wept happy tears when Mark had asked for his blessing. "Robert, you take care of my little girl, son. She's the best part of me." And Mark had. He'd folded into their family unit seamlessly. Sunday dinners at Robert's house became a sacred ritual. Mark and Robert would grill in the backyard, laughing, 2 beers in hand, while Elena watched from the kitchen window, her heart so full it ached. They were her 2 pillars. Her father, representing her past, her foundation. Her fiancé, representing her future, her dreams. She felt cradled between them, safe, loved, unshakable. But even the most beautiful gilded cage is still a cage. And Elena had begun to notice tiny, almost imperceptible fractures in the gold leaf. It was the way Mark's phone would sometimes buzz, and he'd ignore it with a little too much force. The way he'd started a new gym regimen that had him coming home later, his explanations just a little too vague. Traffic was a nightmare. Got caught up editing. And her father, he seemed quieter lately. Distant. When she'd ask if he was okay, he'd force a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Robert, just tired, sweetheart. Must be getting old." Elena, the architect, believed in solid foundations. She saw these small cracks and tried to patch them with love, with attention, with more Sunday dinners. She never imagined the cracks weren't separate. She never dreamed they were connected, forming a single, treacherous fault line running directly beneath her feet. The first tremor hit on a random Thursday. Elena was working late at the office, finishing a model for a client presentation. Her laptop, an ancient, wheezing thing, finally gave up the ghost. The screen flickered and died with a pathetic sigh. She cursed. All her work was there. But Mark, ever the tech-savvy photographer, had a solution. He'd recently backed up her entire system to his powerful desktop computer at home. "Mark, just remote in, babe. The login is the same as our streaming service. You can grab the files you need." Grateful, Elena used her work computer to remote access his. His desktop was a chaotic sea of folder icons, mostly named client_shoot_1, client_shoot_2. She found her backup folder and was about to disconnect when a folder name, tucked away in the corner, caught her eye. It was simply named R. A cold, illogical trickle of dread traced a path down her spine. R. Robert? No, that was insane. It was probably for random or reference. But her hand, moving as if of its own volition, guided the cursor and double-clicked. The folder opened. It was password protected. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Why would a folder be locked? Mark wasn't that meticulous with client work. She tried a few passwords. Their anniversary. His birthday. Nothing. Then a thought, dark and unwelcome. She typed in her father's name, Robert. The folder unlocked. Inside were subfolders. Dozens of them. Dates going back nearly a year. She clicked on the most recent one, her hand trembling so violently she almost missed the icon. The folder is filled with images. They were artistic, black and white, intimate. They were of a man, an older man, in his workshop, shirtless, leaning over a workbench, the muscles of his back taut. The lighting was perfect, sensual, and reverent. It was her father. Elena recoiled from the screen as if it had burned her. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. This was wrong. This was invasive. Why would Mark have these? Why would her father pose like this? A voice, Mark's voice, echoed in her memory from months ago. Your dad has a great physique for his age. There's a real strength there. I'd love to photograph him sometime. She had laughed it off. Dad? Oh, he'd be so embarrassed. But he'd done it. And Mark had saved the photos in a secret, locked folder. The air in the office felt thin, suffocating. This was the first crack, wide and jagged, and she was staring into a darkness she couldn't comprehend. The following week was a waking nightmare. Elena moved through her life like a ghost. She smiled at Mark. She hugged her father, all while her mind was screaming. She became a spy in her own home, her senses heightened to a painful degree. She noticed everything. The way Mark's eyes would linger on her father just a second too long. The new, expensive watch on her father's wrist. A gift from an old work buddy, he'd said. The secret, knowing smiles they sometimes shared over dinner. Smiles she'd once mistaken for masculine camaraderie. The weight of the secret was crushing her. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. The image of her father, shirtless in that photograph, was burned onto the back of her eyelids. She needed proof, not of photographs, but of the truth behind them. Her intuition, that once dismissed voice, was now a roaring siren. She had to know what was in the abyss, even if it meant falling in. Her chance came the following Tuesday. Mark was supposed to be on a day-long shoot out of town. Her father had mentioned he was going to be busy in his workshop all day. A cold certainty settled over her. She called in sick to work. She drove to her father's house, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The house that had always been a sanctuary now felt like a fortress hiding a terrible secret. She didn't go to the front door. Instead, she crept around the side, through the garden, to the window of his detached workshop. The blinds were drawn, but there was a gap. She peered inside, and the world ended. There, on the old, worn couch in the corner of the workshop, surrounded by the dollhouses he built for her, were Mark and her father. They weren't talking. They weren't working. They were wrapped in an embrace so intimate, so passionate, it left no room for misinterpretation. The snap. That's what she heard. The sound of every string in her heart, her soul, her history, and her future breaking at once. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She simply stood there, frozen, watching the two pillars of her life collapse into each other, crushing her in the rubble. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was beyond emotion. It was a void. She stumbled back to her car, her body numb. She drove home on autopilot, the world outside the windshield a blur of meaningless color. Elena sat in the silent, sun-drenched apartment she shared with Mark. The plants seemed to mock her with their vitality. The framed engagement photo on the mantelpiece was a grotesque lie. She waited. The numbness was giving way to a glacial, clear-eyed fury. Mark came home hours later, whistling, a smile on his face. He dropped his camera bag by the door. "Mark, hey you. Feeling better? I missed you." Elena didn't look at him. She stared out the window, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Elena, how was the shoot?" "Mark, long, exhausting, but productive." She finally turned to look at him. She saw the man she loved, but the image was now superimposed with the man she saw in her father's workshop. The dissonance was physically painful. "Elena, funny. I was at my dad's today. He said he was busy in his workshop all day, too." A flicker, just a tiny flicker of panic in Mark's eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by smooth, practiced calm. "Mark, oh yeah? I swung by briefly before my shoot to drop off that lens he wanted to borrow. Guess he was working hard." Elena. She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the engagement photo. "Elena, stop lying to me, Mark." "I know." "Mark? Know what, babe? You're being weird." "Elena." She turned and looked him dead in the eye. The fury, the hurt, the absolute devastation finally broke through the ice in her voice. "Elena, I know you're fucking my father. I saw you. In his workshop. Today." The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Mark's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Denial, fear, shame, and then a strange, defiant resignation. The mask was off. "Mark? Elena, it's not what you think." "Elena," a bitter, broken laugh, "not what I think." "What is it then, Mark?" "A creative collaboration? A new form of father-son bonding." "Mark, we didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. We connected. On a level I can't even explain." Hearing him admit it, hearing him try to justify it, was a fresh wave of agony. She picked up the framed photo and threw it against the wall. The glass exploded. "Elena, get out. Get your things and get out. Now." As Mark scrambled to pack a bag, her phone rang. It was her father. She answered, putting it on speakerphone. "Robert," voice trembling. "Elena, honey, Mark just called me. We need to talk." "Elena, there's nothing to talk about, Dad. I saw you. Both of you." Robert, crying now, "Please, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Your mother, after she died, I was so lonely." Mark, he understood. Her father's tears, which had always been able to move mountains for her, now felt like a manipulation. The ultimate betrayal. "Elena, you were lonely? So you decided to sleep with the man who was going to be my husband? You destroyed my future to fix your past? You're no longer my father. Don't call me again." She ended the call. She looked at Mark, standing by the door with his bag, a pathetic figure. "Elena, and you, the wedding is off. I never want to see you again. If you try to contact me, I will send the evidence I have to every one of your clients. Now, get out of my sight." He left. The door clicked shut, and in the sudden, deafening silence, surrounded by the ruins of her life, Elena finally let the tears come. They were not tears of sadness, but of rage, of grief, of mourning for the father she thought she had and the future she thought was hers. That was a year ago. The aftermath was a brutal landscape of therapy, of anger, of profound grief. Elena didn't just lose a fiancé and a father. She lost her entire understanding of love, trust, and family. She had to tear down the entire structure of her identity and rebuild it from the ground up. She moved to a new city. She quit her job and started her own small architecture firm. She built a new family, not of blood, but of choice, friends who were loyal, who were true. She heard snippets through the reluctant grapevine of old acquaintances. Mark's career had stalled. The scandal, though contained, had a way of leaking out. Her father, he'd tried to write letters. She burned them all unread. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Some bridges need to stay ash. Sitting in her new apartment, looking at blueprints for a house she was designing for a young couple, Elena felt a sense of peace. It was a bruised peace, a peace that had been earned through pain, but it was real. The two pillars were gone, and she had discovered, to her own astonishment, that she could stand on her own. She was her own foundation. The love she had for them didn't vanish. It transformed, becoming a hard-won lesson etched into her soul. The little girl who believed her father could do no wrong was gone. The young woman who believed in fairy tale romance was gone. In their place was a woman who knew the depth of darkness people were capable of, but who also knew her own immense, unshakable strength. The story of Elena, Mark, and Robert is not a story about a love triangle. It is a story about a moral collapse. It's a reminder that the people we place on pedestals are just that, people. Flawed, fragile, and capable of causing unimaginable hurt. But it is also a story of survival. It's about the terrifying, beautiful discovery that you can survive the unsurvivable, that you can walk through the fire of the ultimate betrayal and emerge on the other side, not unscarred but stronger, tempered. Elena learned that sometimes the most important structure you will ever build is not made of brick and mortar, but of boundaries, self-respect, and the courage to walk away from anyone who betrays your foundation, even if they're the two people who are supposed to love you most in the world. Thank you for listening.